everyone, to this episode of Freedom Hub's Working Group. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Froman. You do remember we are being sponsored by the Freedom Hub, which is the disruptors intersection, and we're definitely trying to unite all the activists and disruptors out there to really work hard to get this to be a much better world. We are archiving all of these. We're on all of the key channels, and any others as they come along will be a part of those as well. We are allowing you to register so you can get notices on a regular basis. To kind of show you what else we've got in the background, we are operating a LinkedIn group. Oh, look at this. I had Jason doing a little search there. We have got, I forgot to click onto it. Here it is. So we definitely like you to be a participant in this. It's a great little group. We've got some really nice members and conversation going on. As I said, we're sponsored by the Freedom Hub. So this is the marketplace for health, wealth, and freedom. This is a fantastic site with a lot of great stuff on here you'll see as you come across and adding all the time. But the reason I'm taking this here is that this is the archival page. So if I'm on the home screen and I hover over home, you'll see it says information and events, and then it also says continuing the conversation. These are critical. Here's the page that's pertinent to the shows that we do. So here's today. You'll notice there's Jason listed over here, I see. And then also we have one tonight at 7. This is with the assistant who was a former advisor in the president's administration until recently. Very good. And then also we do one on Thursdays, which is all about understanding your finances and how to accelerate your financial freedom. Most of the institutions in America have a different plan for your money, so you should get control of it and be in charge of it yourself. And then if you missed it, who's coming up. And then also here are the links that I showed you a moment ago. So this way you don't have to try to remember them. You just come here and they're all listed right here for all of the different series. Now, as I said, if you hover over home and see continuing the conversation, just like today, typically these events are quite meaningful and they're hardly the end all by just occurring. So we need you to continue on. So we're going to give you the opportunity to continue the conversation with all sorts of really fantastic people where you can get a chance to see, like here's an example. If you click in there, you're going to be able to find their page, information, stuff that we talked about, the links to the videos, their slide presentation or whatever they had, links to their blogs, abilities to participate and be part of any legislation or activity that needs to take place. Under Fighting for Freedom, as an example, and this kind of finishes up this theme here, is the fact that these are all the key issues and actions that you need to be activating right now, not pick one or the other, but actually click on every one of these. These are the cream of the crop of the most important issues that are going out there, because all these different organizations down here that are fighting for our freedom, each has some different typical legislative bent or something that they pursue, and all of them are important. So we're wanting you to become a participant in one way or another. Here's your way to do so. And then as an example, we've uncovered a fantastic organization that's cutting edge in terms of the ideas, the science of nutrition, as opposed to just speculating or concocting. This is actually scientifically created. And we happen to have one that's very pertinent today, considering the fact that we're having a number of people with these health challenges. These are able to take care of some of the major issues we have going on today that are causing businesses to be forced to close down and so on. And that particular program is really good. And just you'll see up here, it says 15% discount. But if you pick that one product and write an affiliate affiliate sample, you're going to get it like for $19 instead of $50. We got a special price on that one particular product. But anyway, let's get back into today here for a moment. So let's talk a little bit about our guest, and I'm going to actually make use of this particular page to do so. So Charles, if you will do the honors here.
Gladly, Jeff, and welcome Councilman Arps. Jeff, I met Jason. In this case, I don't remember. I did see in talking to him to arrange this webinar that I think we did have some exchange on Facebook message when, for Governor Johnson's presidential campaign, I was running his nonprofit, Our America Initiative, and recruiting all the volunteers in all the states and generating enthusiasm and infrastructure for all the events for the Liberty Tour. So I think we may have communicated there a little bit for Indiana grassroots. But looking at his LinkedIn and talking to him, I see he has a pretty solid background and in Wall Street finance. It looks like he packaged mortgages together for securities. And he has a college background from Carolina at a college near me in Virginia. And I think like a lot of libertarians, it looks like he took the Republican route to get elected, which is the Ron Paul direction. And, you know, I think with all of our guests, Jeff, we kind of get an open-minded opinion on how to get liberty. There is no true scientific path to liberty. It's an art. And, you know, if it takes this party or that party to get there and hold the line on wasteful spending, corruption, and taxation, you know, I don't think it really should matter which method you use to get there. You know, a long-term dream of mine, Jeff, is, you know, Ron Paul's favorite president is a Democrat, Grover Cleveland from 1890. He was, like Gary Johnson, governor veto. Grover was governor of New York, and Gary was governor of New Mexico. In both cases, they just said no all the time. And so that became their nickname. And I would like to see a libertarian run in a Democrat primary and use whatever sophistry is necessary to, you know, speak to that low information mindset and get elected, you know, and just cause some cognitive dissonance. So again, you know, whatever method to liberty. So that's my intro, Jeff.
Oh, that's good. At least you didn't try to make us sound like to be a bunch of disruptors over here. So that's good. So Jason, I'm going to give you the floor here. I'm going to actually stop my sharing and give you.
Okay.
Well, and one more thing, Jason, before you start. Sorry, Jeff. The reason that I really am looking forward to this event is because it's not just about Trump or higher office. It is about getting involved locally where you can do a lot of libertarian damage. So that's why I wanted to have Jason prove that thesis. So that's the last line, Jeff.
No, and that's good because really that's where things really happen to build their way all the way up to the presidential thing. We all just focus on Cleveland's high profile. But Jason's really in the thick of the trenches. So yes, I'm excited too. So Jason, if you would.
That's a very good segue into something that we've been working on here in Indiana. It's called the Foothold Project. It's a collaboration with myself and some others with the Indiana Policy Review, which is the state policy network branch here in Indiana. Actually, one of the founders of the State Policy Network was from Indiana and started Indiana Policy Review way back in the 80s. You guys may not know this, but the Vice President of the United States was once a president of the Indiana Policy Review. I think both have matured in different ways since then. But the idea of the Foothold Project is that a council member, a city council member in your town, over time will have a bigger impact on your life, how politics affects your life, how government affects you, than who the president of the United States is. That's kind of the general idea. And the hope there is that you get good people that would want to run and try to bring liberty to their hometown or the town that they're living in. Again, I am Jason Arp, and I'm in Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne's about 250,000 people within the city itself. The county we reside in is about 360,000 people. My district is about 45,000 people, so it's a little less than a state representative district. As Charlie mentioned earlier, I am from North Carolina. I went to school there. I grew up there. I'm an Army brat. My dad was a career Army. And my early professional career was in banking. I did trade mortgage-backed securities and got to see some interesting things. Got to see some very non-economic decisions being made because of government policies. And if you could be a fly in the room of some of those discussions as the CRA compliance meetings were happening, it was quite interesting. I got my political enlightenment there while I was working for the bank. One of the salespeople for international brokerage had their tagline on their Bloomberg terminal said, "Who is John Galt?" And at that time, I had never heard of Atlas Shrugged. And I did some searching around and asking, what does this mean? Who is John Galt? And I finally read Atlas Shrugged, and it really was eye-opening to me. But the clincher was, I was reading an investment newsletter that was suggested to us by one of our portfolio managers. And at the time, we were looking at ways foreign central banks were diversifying their assets, many of whom had been buying mortgage-backed securities, but we saw that some major ones were buying lots of gold. And so I came across the name Ron Paul as being the taxpayer's best friend, and I guess that kind of sealed the deal. I've become a student of Ron Paul and the libertarian movement since. So why is it important to have a libertarian leaning or libertarian on city council? Well, actually, to kind of bring your local government back to what the purposes of government are. It seems like government has adopted all of these new goals and aspirations that have really nothing to do with what a government well-defined is. A government should be there to protect, as John Locke said famously, life, liberty, and property, and not much else. Unfortunately, what we see here is a lot of social engineering, a lot of trying to push ideas and behaviors and control, particularly control of people's financial assets. They may not understand that until they get into some of the details of how they're being controlled, even by their local government. So one of the joys, I guess, I've had in being on city council is actually defending civil liberties. Early on, I had a case where a constituent contacted me because they had been stopped by the police for carrying a firearm in a city park. And I don't know about in your jurisdictions what your gun laws are, but Indiana's got fairly liberal gun laws. If you have a license to carry a handgun, you can carry a handgun most places. And the state prohibits cities from limiting that. Well, we had old ordinances on the books that were still being enforced that nobody had questioned, that were allowing police officers to stop people in city parks that happened to be carrying a firearm. This gentleman was actually riding his bicycle through a park on his way to work. He worked night shift at a gas station, and it was for his own personal protection. So I was able to work with attorneys here in town and with the rest of the council to actually eliminate those laws so that way people could protect themselves here. And that was a big win, to actually have a win on the gun rights issue in a city council. Was unheard of. And I got called all kinds of nasty names in the news media and by my fellow council members. Even fellow Republicans were chastising me for Art being the person that wanted to put armed men in city parks. It was quite hilarious, actually. Another issue came up about a year after that, where a constituent contacted me because of a run-in with animal control. The animal control department had put this person in a position where they had ended up in jail. And I'll explain. The lady was a school teacher, and her husband was a principal at a school, kind of your model Ozzie and Harriet family, small children, dog. Anyway, the neighbor's dog wandered into their yard, and their dog bit that dog. Both dogs end up in the veterinarian's office, and the way that the city code is written requires that all dog bites be reported to animal control. And then the dog has to be microchipped and quarantined and monitored by city animal control. Some of these notifications got mixed up in the mail, and the constituent contacted animal control and asked them, if they're complying, and they said yes. Well, it turns out that one of the things that they had failed to do was to appear before a board to have a hearing about the dog bite. So the next thing they know, they get a warrant for their arrest because they missed a court date. The lady turns herself in, and she's actually arrested on site and put in jail overnight in general population where she was assaulted. My recommendation, excuse me, my recommendation to my constituent was that they would sue the city. They did, and they won. I had sat down with the animal control department and asked them to, we got to look at these regulations and change these so that way this sort of thing doesn't happen again. To have a lady really shamefully abused in the jail was outrageous, and there was no appetite by animal control, no appetite by city council to change the rules. So I ended up writing a article that's published in the Foundation for Economic Education, outlining exactly what had happened. I get a call from the county sheriff threatening me for speaking poorly of his jail. So just remember, these are the types of people that run your city public safety units. So Mercy earlier was talking about chickens. We actually tried to pass an ordinance here to allow people to have chickens as well. This was an effort that we had collected, I think, close to 5,000 signatures to allow people to be able to keep chickens. It was a very popular initiative, and unfortunately, the health department convinced the council that chickens were dangerous to the public health, which is pretty ridiculous. You can have chickens in Brooklyn, New York. You can have chickens in Chicago. You have chickens in Indianapolis, but in Fort Wayne, they're dangerous. Unfortunately, we were not able to pass that. That measure failed with 2 votes for and 7 against. Another attempt to breach people's property rights or civil liberties was a bill that was passed called the Chronic Problem Property Ordinance. And this ordinance basically allowed the city to fine people for maintaining a building that was considered to be a public nuisance. So places where there are lots of calls for police assistance. The claim was that these were places where people were engaged in drug trafficking or using of drugs or prostitution or whatever. But we already have laws on the books in the state of Indiana for maintaining a common nuisance. Those can be tried if you have evidence that supports that. But with a city ordinance, the level of evidence required to prove the standard is not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's just the preponderance of evidence. That way they can fine people without actually proving that they were guilty. Well, this is obviously a taking of property. We fought that one. Unfortunately, we did not have the votes to be able to beat that. The funny thing is that here we are 3 years into that, and the police department that was supposed to keep records on upholding this particular ordinance can't tell us how many people. They have said that no one has been fined, but they can't even tell us how many calls or how many records they have, how many check marks they have by these businesses that they said were such a problem in the past. It's almost like they're aggregating laws to be used at some time in the future. I tried to get that repealed. We'll take another stab at it next year. Going back to the thing they were talking about with the health department and the dogs and the chickens and that sort of thing, to give you an idea of the types of people that end up in these positions and the hunger for power that they exhibit. No better example could be made than what we have experienced here in the last 7 months. Friday the 13th of March of 2020 will go down in my memory similar to 9/11. All the city officials and county officials were all called to meet in a meeting to discuss what the city and county's reaction to the coronavirus outbreak was going to be. And to see the health commissioner's reaction, she had a slideshow ready to go showing us what she believed was her constitutional authority to take away people's freedom, to lock them away, to force them to quarantine, to take away their property, to take away their property rights, to take away their ability to leave their home and to interact with other people. And as she was delivering this message, she had this smile on her face. This was her big moment. She was so excited that she had mayors and police chiefs and fire departments and councilmen and commissioners all there that had to listen to her edicts, and that she could make rules that we were supposed to have to carry out. So I got a call from a church the next week or so that said that they had been threatened by the health department that they would be closed because they wanted to continue to have services. I was able to contact the Attorney General's office and petition several state representatives and state senators and other council members to join in on a letter requesting a judgment by the Attorney General, who then ruled that the actions of the county health commissioner were unconstitutional. And it was hilarious. Within a few weeks, she announced her retirement, and within a couple months, she was gone. It was no longer fun for her because we had taken away her ability to put down these tyrannical edicts. One of the things that I try to do on council is promote economic freedom. As you guys know, economic freedom equals prosperity. If you look at the economic freedom index of the world that's produced every year, you'll see that the countries that are most economically free are also those that are the most well off. And that goes to not only the richest people, also the poorest people benefit from that. Their standard of living, their health, everything else. A prosperous free economy tends to lift all boats. One of the things I've tried to do here is eliminate a tax on business equipment. A lot of our neighboring states have eliminated that tax in the past. We continue to hold on to that tax. It's the business personal property tax. So that's a tax on business equipment. So that could be anything from CNC machines to robots to computers, any kind of business equipment. You'd be surprised how much pushback I got, not only from the governmental units, which I kind of expected, but from the Chamber of Commerce and the school boards, some of the tied-in attorneys and whatnot. And I found out that the issue isn't necessarily that they wanted this tax to be available for all of their in the different business units, like let's say, or taxing units, I should say, not business units, taxing units like the schools. The way our property taxes are done here, the county collects them all, distributes about 30% to the city, 30% to the schools, 20% to the county, and then the rest is kind of divided up between redevelopment councils or airport authority or bus, mass transit, that sort of thing. Ostensibly, that was the argument, but in reality, the same amount of dollars that we're talking about just for eliminating the tax on, the local government already gives away in tax benefits to specify specific businesses that come and get either tax abatement or tax increment financing for the projects. At the time, we're talking about $60 million a year. And rather than handing those out to the folks that happen to make their way through the system, let's just get rid of that tax, and that way it's free, and we're not picking winners and losers. There's been a lot of work on that. I really heavily leaned on some stuff that was written by some folks at George Mason's Mercatus Institute, and also a gentleman that's become a friend of mine here in Indiana, Barry Keating. Barry actually worked with Gordon Tullock and Vernon Smith and James Buchanan back in the 80s, and before that actually worked with Milton Friedman on the Capital and Freedom series. So Dr. Keating, who's a professor, was the head of the business department at Notre Dame, was a great help in making these presentations on why this was a good idea. None of the council members particularly cared about what was a good idea for the economy. They knew that the business lobby wanted to keep these taxes and to be able to lobby for specific breaks for specific companies. It empowered them. So that's kind of the contrast between the economic development model that you see, these economic development entities within local governments. You'll see economic development corporations that's what we have in Indiana. I think it's very similar in most places. These things are designed to benefit those that are willing to play the game and to make campaign contributions to particular candidates, particularly incumbents. One thing that we were able to pass here a few years ago, I authored legislation on what we call pay to play. So the way that the bill was written, it was that if your company made over a certain amount of campaign contributions to the mayor or to any member of city council, then you were ineligible to bid for work or contracts with the city. Because what we're finding, there was a very high correlation between campaign contributions and contracts. In fact, for law firms, the correlation was 90%, and it was a 10-to-1 payoff. So for every dollar you contributed to the mayor's office, you would receive $10 in legal work. The payoff was much better in construction and engineering. Correlation wasn't nearly as high, but you would see the payoff be anywhere between 50 to 100 times as much. So if you give $1 to the mayor, you would get 100 back. Unfortunately, the state Supreme Court ruled that it was an unconstitutional law, that it prohibited the free speech of the contractors, to not allow them to be able to buy their way into City Hall. One of the big issues or big things that I try to do here is to bring light on a lot of the economic development activity. That we can call that fiscal discipline, fighting corruption, fraud, and abuse. And what you typically see is the subsidization of business models that wouldn't work otherwise, that are subsidized by government. Something that sometimes is huge. For example, here in Fort Wayne, we had a project called The Landing, which is basically taking a strip of buildings that was downtown near the river. The reason it's called The Landing, it used to be a landing for canal boats way back when, and people could visit prostitutes or whatever on the landing. Today, it's a bunch of mediocre apartment buildings and offices and bars and restaurants, which is fine. That's what the market decided to put there. It's great. But the city, in all their wisdom, hired a developer to reimagine the landing as new apartments, offices, retail, and restaurants. The project cost came to $32 million, and 2/3 of the money for the project was to come from public sources, a mix of federal tax credits, local tax credits, state tax credits, funding from the Regional Development Authority, and tax increment financing from the local government. So this would be something that's really benefiting this small group of people that are developers and investors there. But the thing that you find with most of these projects is that the total cost of the project well exceeds what the economic value is. And the way I assign values is the way I evaluate anything is the present value of the cash flows. So if you looked at what the potential rents were going to be from the new project, they cash flowed out to be worth about $11 million using a discount rate of 5%, which is, you know, I think I was giving them a lot of credit using that discount rate. Basically, you're looking at the rents less any expenses discounted to present value. So in that particular case, that was a 3-to-1 payoff to the developers for what the project was going to be worth. There's a vested interest in making these things as expensive as possible, because the developer puts almost no money in whatsoever and will end up owning it at the end of the project. And they get paid up front a development fee that's in excess of what their equity was at the beginning. The contractors, the architects, the engineers, the law firms that handle all the bonding, all lobby for this through the local chamber. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. The landing turned out to be a model. Not only it was done by a group called the Model Group, and following what they called the Richard Florida model. If you guys know who Richard Florida is, he's someone that really promoted this idea of urban rejuvenation using public-private partnerships. As you guys may know, the master of public-private partnerships was Benito Mussolini. This idea that you can have the government and private entities partner up to do projects, and that's going to be somehow better than just allowing the free market to operate, only works for grifters and those that are planning on economic graft. But that turned out to be a model to be followed later by another developer here in town with a project called the Electric Works. They wanted to take an old General Electric motor factory and convert it into a mixed-use facility. Now, this was going to be about 1.5 million square feet, and it was going to end up costing close to $1 billion by the time it was all said and done. But they were doing it in phases. So phase one was about 500,000 square feet, and it was going to cost about $250 million. 60 million of that was to come from local tax sources, another 60 from state tax credits, another 80 from federal tax credits, and then the balance is going to be loans and equity. Again, the same mix. If you took the square footage and multiplied it by going commercial rates for that type of property, and subtracted out all the expenses, discounted at the present value in perpetuity, the project is only going to be worth about $80 million. And here we were going to spend $250 million to build this thing. Again, the developers had no equity in it. They're also going to get paid a $15 million development fee up front. And the taxpayers were going to be in line for the success of this thing. And it was modeled in a way it kind of reminded me of some of the CDOs and Alt-A MBS back when my mortgage-backed securities trading business. The banks would create special purpose vehicles whose only purpose was really to declare bankruptcy at some time in the future. And the structure of the vehicle and the way that the loans were given to it, the banks put themselves in a senior position, which when the whole thing fell apart, all of the mezzanine and junior equity positions would all be wiped out. The equity holder that was kind of the starter expected to lose all their money. That was part of the design of the program. This reminded me a lot of that. If there's anybody in the FBI that would listen to me, I would certainly talk to them about this project, but I'm guessing they've probably seen lots of these and they don't care. These things are made possible by a group called Greater Fort Wayne. They are our Chamber of Commerce and the city's economic development contractor. So the Economic Development Corporation has a contractor that operates it, and it's also our Chamber of Commerce. We pay these people to put together these deals, and they come to council and the mayor and have us fund these things. And most council members are very happy to do this. I've been fighting some of these projects for up to 5 years now. I thought that we had finally killed this Electric Works thing because the lenders, I think, got a hint of what it was that was going on and backed out, so they didn't have enough money to come to closing. So one of the questions that a lot of people ask about local government and libertarianism is, well, how would you build the roads? Well, for the major thoroughfares, I think we've got a long way to go as a society to figure out how that would be done. But one of the things that I'm always dealing with is local neighborhood roads. And I think that those really could be done better by neighborhood associations than they could by the city. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. I had a neighborhood association president call and ask me to come and talk to them about their neighborhood roads. And I took a look at them, and there was a couple spots that were bad, but there was a lot of other neighborhoods that are a lot worse. We can only fix so many miles per year, and we spend about $35 million a year on streets here in the city, and it's a smaller portion of that is for neighborhood roads. And I asked the people in this neighborhood association meeting to take a look at their tax bill and see how much they spend. The average home at the time that we're doing this is just roughly $100,000. Fort Wayne is a very low cost of living environment. I think it's gone up quite a bit since then. But anyway, this was a few years ago. We have property tax caps that cap property taxes at 1%. So that would be $1,000. The first cut of these taxes are going to be 30% are going to go to schools, 30% is going to go to the city, 20% is going to go to the county, and the rest will go to the airport and various other like buses and things like that, libraries. So that means in the city, in our budget, we got of that $1,000, $300 to allocate to the things that cities do. Well, the majority of it's going to go to police and fire, and then there's a big part that goes to parks. That leaves, so out of that $300, you may be looking at maybe $25 that's available to the streets. Well, then some of that's got to go to the major thoroughfares, which are not going to be neighborhood roads. So you're getting down to where out of your property taxes, only maybe $10 is allocated to neighborhood roads. So it's kind of a lottery every year of whose roads get done. There's no master plan. There's no amortization schedule. There's nothing that times these out in a way where you know that your streets are going to be replaced in 30 years or whatever the useful life is. Whereas if you as a neighborhood decided to, rather than give the government that money, set up your own trust to have the authority to collect the dues from members in the neighborhood to go into this, and then you scheduled it out, borrowed the money to build the roads, and then at the time that the the bonds be paid off, then you could do it again and replace them. So that's my attempt to answer the question, what about my roads, or my roads, I guess is the meme. At the end of the day, I think what I'm doing here is shedding truth and light into a very dark place where lots of deals were done to benefit certain people. And I've made it very uncomfortable for politicians to continue to be politicians. And I guess with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Very good. Thanks so much. That was great. And you know, what's so funny, you're really demonstrating the reality when, I forget who even said the great quote that all politics is local. Because we all look at these national broad strokes, and the bulk of that stuff doesn't affect you personally. But just like as simple as the roads, I mean, you're right up against it. And again, it all comes down to power. We think of power on a national basis, but look at the kind of money and the quibbling that goes to try to become the mayor or whatever. You know, that's pretty potent. Before we throw to some questions, I wanted to capitalize, since you brought it up, on what you had mentioned. Back in our site, we actually have this wealth tab, and you'll definitely appreciate why I'm doing this, Jason. And you kind of scroll down here, it tells you about money. This is that event that we do on Thursdays. It's very, very good. I would certainly recommend it. These are past episodes. But here at the bottom, and a lot of these pages do this, we feature some great videos. Well, here's one about the greatest scam, which explains how centralized and kind of fractional banking works. But most importantly, this is the one that's about Ayn Rand. So here you mentioned that, and that is an incredible thing. This fellow, Mike Maloney, is an internationally renowned expert on money and gold, has a series where he reads to his staff. And in this instance, and what's so great about that book is it's a lengthy book, and there's a lot of really great little nuggets, little sections that in and of themselves are killer. But this great one where he reads about why money is actually not the root of all evil, as many say, but money is the root of all good. And what an amazing piece of literature she wrote here. So I would definitely recommend everyone that hasn't read Atlas Shrugged to do so. So I appreciate you bringing her up. That was a fantastic part of what you were commenting there. And you know what I just realized here? Hold on one second. I'm making those comments and I forgot to show my screen. Here's what I was showing a moment ago. On this wealth page, like I said, we have all this information, and down here's about the past episodes, the upcoming ones, and so on. And at the bottom, we feature these various videos. So here's this one that really does a fantastic job explaining how fractional banking works. It is unbelievable what's going on out there. No one has a clue. But Mike, who's this international expert, advises governments on how to operate their currency, has this series where he reads to his staff, and in this instance he reads that passage from Atlas Shrugged about why money is actually the root of all good and how it allows the world to develop and build. So again, I appreciate you bringing that up. So my question, for a lot of people don't understand, what do you get to, you know, you talked about, well, my constituent called about this and about that, so you sound like you're more like a problem solver. What do you get to initiate as a council person? What do you get to do to change local government or local reality? What's within your power?
Well, the state laws kind of define the things that we can do, but one of the things that we're empowered to do is to go through and look at local ordinances and try to get rid of them. And that's what I was able to do with the firearms policy, to just eliminate that. And there's other departments, like currently right now we're going through our budget cycle, and every year I select different departments to try to defund. This year one of those is the Historic Association department. They'll work with homeowners to certify their homes as historic, and then they'll zone them that way, and then no one will ever be able to update or upgrade those homes without going through this department in the future. So this year, try to get rid of that. I'm a realist. I know that most of the time I lose these battles, but at least we have the discussion. I force them to talk about what they think that they're doing, what they think their benefit is to the public. And generally speaking, usually there's no real public benefit other than that person draws a salary.
That totally would make some good sense. Or well, we've got some great questions brewing here. John, I think you've got your hand up.
So I see, what value have open record laws proven to be in reining in local government power by means of the intended end of increased transparency? You know, it's kind of a mixed bag on that one. There are some things that the city has done to make things a lot more transparent, as far as like seeing what their finances are. So they put a ton of information out there. For instance, the check register of the city is made public, so you can see our total expenditures every year. This last year, I think it was $280 million for the civil city, and another $330 million for the city utility. Every single check that they have made is online. But that's just, I mean, it's such a data dump. For most people, it would be very difficult for them to really do much with that. I do have a background in dealing in fairly decent size buckets of data. So I've been able to take that and aggregate it and find out who's buying who, see what firms are getting the contracts, and seeing if I can match that up with campaign contributions. So that's been a lot of benefit to me. The mixed bag is you get, like, I've gotten FOIA requests for my email, and they'll try, but because the city didn't give the council members, they keep us at kind of a arm's length. They force us to end up using proprietary, or like Google, like so I have a Gmail account for my city council account, and because I'm using Gmail, they'll FOIA my personal email that has nothing to do with my city council email as well. So I end up in a legal fight because I don't want them to get into my own personal, you know, I've got health records and financial transactions that have nothing to do with the city but my own business. City council is a very part-time job. They don't pay us very much at all, which is fine. I'd just assume not get paid anything. But you know, I do have another business and another life outside of city council, and to have all that exposed to FOIA requests is not the best thing in the world.
All right. Go ahead. Were you going to make a comment?
It's funny, like sometimes people, so of course, being a libertarian, what is the one attack that we're all under these days? It's that you know, people are looking for anything that you may have said that may have been racist at some point in the past, because of course everybody knows that anybody that likes Ron Paul has to be a racist of some sort. So those are the types of battles you end up having. You know, someone's trying to find some sort of off-color thing in your emails.
David, I see your hand is up.
Jason, just a humorous aside, I'm anarcho-capitalist from Omaha, and before 1956, I was in high school in New Haven, which at that time was the largest Fort Wayne suburb. And just curious, things probably changed quite a bit since I was there. Do they allow chickens and anarcho-capitalists in New Haven?
I don't believe so. I don't believe you can have chickens in New Haven. I think they only, in Allen County, they only allow it in unincorporated areas. It's funny, that was such a line in the sand for them. I'm not sure why all of the county health officials thought it was so important to fight us on that. And I was unable to get a whole lot of help from anybody that was a government official in the county. I did get some help from people in Indianapolis. Believe it or not, in Indianapolis, you can have 12 chickens at your own. Fort Wayne, you can't have any.
It's funny how they decided 12 was the appropriate number. Charles, I see your hand up.
Can you hear me, Jeff?
Yes, indeed.
Jeff, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. So you mentioned the pressure you were on from the health bureaucrats with COVID. Not just whoever influences health bureaucrats, but telecom companies have their own captured agency, the Federal Communications Commission, and they're pressuring local governments in all 50 states to accept 5G transmitters outside people's homes on top of our kids' schools. That's an issue that divides people, I understand, but there are some lax safety concerns with FCC. I know they're facing a lawsuit right now. Have you faced any pressure on the 5th generation development for telecommunications? And if so, how does a libertarian or a pro-business person kind of think about that issue?
It's interesting. Public health officials have dodged the question. There are a lot of questions about it. I think there's some reasonable questions about 5G. The fact that nobody's willing to do any real investigative work on it really raises some red flags in my mind. The state has tried to pass preemptive language in the code book that would prevent cities from stopping the planting of 5G towers. Up until now, we had the ability to basically deny right of way for certain types of activities by utilities. So that's a court case that's continuing here. The city has actually, believe it or not, actually fought for the rights of individuals and is doing what it can to intercede in that case. So there's a ongoing legal battle between the city and the state on who has the authority to decide where towers go.
Definitely good to see that they're trying to confront that, because like you said, that's like a headlong rush without really understanding the unintended consequences that's going to bring to bear.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. I'm not by any means a scientist. It just does seem kind of odd that the questions that have been asked have been kind of just brushed aside.
We've had others on this show that have disclosed some information as to some of the alternate abilities of 5G that might put a little bit of a hair on the back of your neck to stand up. So why are we rushing so quickly? There's so many things unanswered. And just like Charles said, it's going to be on your kid's school. I mean, everyone's going to get affected whether they want it or not. And what we've also learned is some people are physically affected by these microwave systems, where they get migraines and other issues. So how's that going to end up affecting everybody? And, you're going to be at the front line of all of that.
Yeah, one of the questions I have also is your data security and personal privacy type issues. With so many of our appliances now being Wi-Fi capable, you can talk to your oven now and tell it what, how long to bake something or what time to turn on. It having that capability and being in range of a 5G tower may give the NSA another window into your house, which I guess I'm kind of jokingly saying NSA, but then again, after watching the movie Snowden, I guess it's not really a joke.
It's funny, you just saw it, and it's funny how everything is always cloaked in the candy coating. There's this ad for, I think it was Ring, and they have that doorbell with that little camera so you can see who's coming to the front door. But now they have those lights for your backyard that trigger when someone moves, a light clicks on. But it's a camera. So they're talking about you're looking at your house. But surreptitiously, as they sort of say as an aside, and now you're also going to be protecting your neighborhood. And it's like, are those going to interconnect? Is some of the cops going to be tied to that at this point, or can they just readily get that? And then one other last thing in that same invasion of my own space, the idea of drone deliveries when I look up in the evening, is the whole sky going to be an ocean of little drones on their way to their Amazon client bases? How are you going to control the space over my house?
It's funny. You mentioned Ring. I've talked to people that are involved with the 911 system here, which is no longer just telephone. It's internet. It's It's, you know, the 911 capabilities are pretty big in these things. But they have a back door to Ring where they can, local police departments can be given access to your doorbell to be able to monitor things there. That was troubling to me. That came up at a council meeting in which we're funding some of the new 911 equipment. And something that I thought was pretty incredible is they were changing the way that the calls were going to be routed. So if you call 911 from your home phone or your cell phone, as opposed to it going to downtown Fort Wayne to the communications center, it would go to a server in Washington, D.C., and then be rerouted back. So that way they could sync it up to Google Maps. So that way they can get a GPS location.
What about the overhead space? This is something I see all these FAA approvals to do drone deliveries, which, you know, sounds fantastic, except when you think about sitting on your back patio and you look up and there's 250 drones fly over in the last hour and a half on my way to the neighbors to drop off a little box of Tic Tacs and toilet paper.
Right. And then, so then you're getting into where does your property begin and where does the FAA space begin, and it's a lot lower ceiling than you would think. And we ran into that with some of the funding for drones for the police department. As you may guess, most police departments now operate drones to monitor parades and downtown events and that kind of thing. When we had our protests / riots here in June, the drones were a big part of what the police were using to keep the peace or whatever with that. So we haven't seen any kind of model legislation yet on the drone delivery thing. I guess Fort Wayne will be a late adopter on whatever happens with that. That's one of the nice things about Fort Wayne. It's a late adopter, but a lot of times it means you end up missing the whole goofy thing. So we've been a late adopter on some of these big economic development schemes. A lot of places have fallen for these things decades earlier. And right now there's a chance I may be able to beat some of them off.
Well, that or if you do ultimately take them on, you figure out how to make them work because you saw everybody else's mistakes when they rushed in headlong. Charles, you got time for the last question?
Can you hear me, Jeff?
Yes, indeed.
As Jeff mentioned, you know, we pushed the envelope with guests over the past 2 years on all the issues that a individual should care about to really make the most of their life, including we have some whistleblowers. And in a few months, I have a whistleblower from the NSA who claims to have been targeted by local fusion sensors that have a lot more powers that are somewhat Orwellian, allegedly, which obviously would be enhanced by 5G and satellite technology. To what extent do you get, like Jesse Ventura was saying when he was becoming governor of Minnesota, you get taken down to a basement room by security types saying, this is how we kind of work in your area, don't interfere. What kind of pressure, if any, do you have with the feds or state and some security types for what they do? If that makes sense?
Yeah, I think so. I have a habit of sharing a lot of my thoughts through the media. So I've written probably 24 pieces for Indiana Policy Review and dozens of articles for the local newspaper, and a couple of things have been published in other places throughout the state, and actually a couple of things in. So they're not going to come to me with anything that's even remotely, unless they plan on being a whistleblower. They're not going to share anything with me that they don't want the public to know. So if it's not something I can dig into and find on my own, I may not find it. I have had people tell me things in a non-official capacity that I cannot verify, so I can't really do anything. I don't want to look like a quack because someone told me about some sort of technology that may or may not be real. So my hands are kind of tied that way. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of technologies out there that I'm unaware of that are probably violating our Fourth Amendment rights right now.
Jason, I said that Charles was going to ask the last question, but I think I was wrong because I'm going to ask the last question. But here it is, and this is a good one, actually. Now that you've been doing this, so you've got hindsight behind you, would you do this again, and would you encourage someone like myself or anyone else listening to say, you know what, this is a great idea. I should run for city council because look what I'm going to be able to do. This is going to be very rewarding. Assuming a lot of them, which people don't appreciate, you either get no money or little money, was it worth the whole effort?
If you are in a position where you're independent enough that your business is not dependent on local contracts, you're not dependent on doing business with local firms or so I made a lot of money at the bank. Before I left, I socked away quite a bit of money, and most of our income is derived from sources outside of the state of Indiana. So that gives me a lot of freedom in what I say and do on council. So I wouldn't recommend it necessarily to someone that was going to be in a position where they felt like they're going to lose their job because they didn't vote for somebody's project. Unless that's a choice you've decided to make. But we've got small kids and I guess
that's just to interject. That's a really sad thing to be able to have to say. But putting that part aside, for what you've been able to do, and all the slings and arrows thrown at you, is it worth what you're doing? I mean, are you making a difference in the world, and is it worth the obnoxiousness of having to deal with everybody there?
Just when I start feeling like, gosh, why in the heck am I even doing this? I'll get a call from someone that just wants to take me out to lunch and thank me. They say, you're doing something that none of us else can do. You're fighting the good fight. You're standing for things that none of us here can do because our jobs depend on going along to get along. And I think that makes me feel like I'm doing something. And the other thing is the breadcrumbs that we're leaving when we do these things, in the newspapers and TV interviews and whatnot, is for the remnant. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Albert J. Nock, but he wrote an essay called Isaiah's Job.
Yes, great.
That essay really firmed up when I read that. It was a great encouragement to me that what we're doing is important, that some future generation is going to take these bits of liberty that we've left, and they're going to put it together and maybe experience the liberty that we wish that we had.
That was great. What a perfect conclusion. We're just waiting for the Renaissance. So this is perfect. But Jason, thank you so much. That was
the remnant, Jeff. The remnant.
Yeah.
Well, I was using a different phraseology, but
Yeah.
that's really kind of what it becomes. You look at what was done in the past. You get so far. It's the old sports analogy when the person who's like the unbelievable, phenomenal baseball players coming off their game, the coach says, "You know what? We need to get back to the basics. Why don't we work on your standard pitching? Let's do the T-ball again," that kind of thing. And that's really what this comes back to, because society always seems to have to circle back to reality after we've run on our little fanciful path. So, Jason, that's great.
Well, I will say this. The last 6 or 7 months has been really frustrating, seeing all the overreach of government. But you know what? It's brought so many people, awoken so many people that have been lulled to sleep, to see that, hey, the water is boiling, it's time to jump. And I think we're going to see great things in the next couple of years. I think this has been an awakening for a lot of people.
No, that's usually what seemingly happens. You need suddenly everyone to realize that the water's boiling, as opposed to that incrementalism where they just turn the heat up 1 degree at a time. No one sees it happen. So, Jason, thanks again for today.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate it, Jeff.